Magnus Carlsen is unable to believe that he has lost that game, his game against Firusha, the second game that he lost in a row. The fourth round on the second day of the Grand Chess Tour in Croatia, Magnus Carlsen faced his old World Championship challenger, Fabiano Caruana. And Magnus started with English. Caruana played knight f6, and we have a few standard moves. Magnus goes for the central d4 push, takes, and bishop b4, g3, and knight a4. This is an interesting move by Fabiano Caruana. He is basically asking Magnus to push the e3 pawn after he has played g3. So it's kind of causing an inconvenience to this bishop. The bishop would like to go there, but the c pawn is hanging. So what does Magnus do? Magnus defends with the queen. d5, takes and takes. Now queen b5, Magnus decides to exchange queens. Fabi asks Magnus to take, and this is the position we have. You can see black has got a few cluttered pieces here, putting pressure on white's queen side. Right now there's a threat, right? So position is slightly better for black already. So the opening battle has been won by Fabi, and now after bishop d2 takes, Magnus plays a move that is questionable, that is dubious. He does not take back immediately. He could, and then bishop a3 and rook b1 and castles. Position is comfortable for Fabi. Magnus decides to play knight c2, a move that has not been played much before, and for very good reason, because it's not a great idea. Because what happens is knight takes a2, and it's a pawn down for Magnus. After takes, Magnus doesn't have enough compensation for the pawn. If anything, black is completely fine after castles. There will be pressure on the king. So f3, Magnus is preparing king f2, basically. Bishop e6, and bishop c3, and b6. Rook is kicked back. Magnus can go passive with rook a1, but then knight b3 and the rook won't have that much space. Rook will actually get almost trapped. There is e4 there still, but it's not a comfortable position for the rook. It will be very passive. So Magnus decides to go rook g5, and Fabi just castles. Again, there's a threat over here. Any knight move, let's say knight f3 is a big threat. So what does Magnus have to do? He has to move his king, and now g6, defending the g pawn, and now king f2, and this allows Fabi to play f6, and the rook is trapped. It has no squares. So Magnus would have seen all this. He planned rook g4, but the position is completely lost after that. Magnus tries to fight on by pushing his kingside pawns, h5, g5, h6, and now knight b5 and bishop all the way back. It's a very sorry looking position for Magnus Carlsen. Pawn e3, and now Fabi says, I don't believe in your setup. He just activates his pieces, takes a pawn, and after knight c4, Magnus resigned because the pressure is too much. You can play bishop f2, but after bishop f2, knight e5 comes. And when king goes back, knight g4 comes. Pressure on the bishop. The h-pawn counterplay is too slow. So this is how Magnus lost this fourth round game against Fabiano Caruana. It was a game that was difficult from the beginning itself, in the opening itself. Now, after this game, Magnus faced his favorite opponent, Alireza Firusha, in the fifth round. So let's see how the young Firusha played against Magnus Carlsen. Alireza played e4, Magnus played e5, and we have the Joko piano opening. c3 and d6 and bishop g5. h6, bishop back, and a4, a5. Castles, bishop b6, just preparation against d4. And now king h1, and here comes g5. So Magnus is going kind of all in. I mean, the bishop has to go back and the knight can jump to good squares. So when black does these things, white should look to play in the center generally. That's how these games usually go. Bishop g3, knight h5, and knight d2. Bishop g4, h3, bishop went back, and now bishop b5. Knight f4. So Magnus got what he wanted, a nice knight, and attacking chances against the white king. So it looks very nice for black, practically. Here, Firusha had to play d4 and create some tension in the center, but he goes knight c4, h5, now takes, and knight d2. King f8. So Magnus would not want this rook to go out of this file. The king is on it. So he keeps the king on f8, d4, now knight e7. So Magnus feels that he needs more pieces over here. If that knight can jump in, then g4 is looking good. So takes, and here knight f3 back. And Magnus has to either give up one of his pawns or exchange queens. He can exchange queens and then play f6. Then the attacking chance are gone and rook will enter, and white will be in control. So Firusha has actually dealt with Magnus's aggressive play well. And now queen c7, Magnus gives up the g pawn and Firusha takes it. Even though the g file is open, it's very difficult to create play on the g file because anytime white wants, I can even do this. So rook d8, queen c2. So Magnus is a pawn down. Knight g6, rook d1, and Magnus doesn't have any pawn breaks to open up this king. So the attack is very difficult here. King g7, and now knight f3, knight e6, knight h4. Firusha just exchanges more pieces, and f3, and everything is stable. The bishop can come back to f2, and now queen c4, attacking a2. Queen comes back. So he's got a small weakness to target on c3, but now the play is completely in the center, and it's a clean pawn down for Magnus Carlsen. So here bishop e3 takes, and rook d8. So Magnus decides to exchange more pieces, go into an endgame, like a queen and minor piece endgame, takes, and knight d6. c4, knight f7, king moves, and now a4, and queen b5. Bishop f2, knight h8. Weird looking move, but the knight is rerouting to maybe better squares. He goes f4, does Firusha, queen b2. Now bishop g3 takes, and knight f7. Bishop e3, knight d4, knight e5, bishop f4, and now a6. So another exchange, and now it's a queen endgame with one pawn down for Magnus Carlsen. So this pawn is pretty important, right? If that pawn falls, then the a pawn becomes very dangerous. But right now, white has defended it. So he does not give a check. He goes queen e6, just staying on the diagonal. And now h4. That's a very nice move from Magnus. So basically here, instead of queen e6, Firusha had to bring his king in. King g3 would have kept his advantage. But after queen e6, white's king is stuck. Can't escape. And white's queen is also stuck to this pawn. And it's somewhat difficult for white to convert this, to have claim any advantage here. So, but queen check, and here king f7 was played. A very normal move, right? But the problem is after takes, queen check, king moves, and takes, check, and the pawn pushes. Here, if he pushes the pawn, you will still need a time to stop it. So, for example, here a2 was possible, but Magnus did not play a2, probably because he was very low on time, and he must have thought there's a perpetual here after queen takes, which he played. If white pushes, I mean after a check, white pushes, there will be a perpetual idea here. Must have been what he thought, or maybe he thought if he pushes a pawn, white will also push. And okay, first I'll give a check just to make the queen active. Queen d8 check, king f4, and then push. And then black promotes, white promotes. And if queen takes queen, take back, and this is still better for white. It'll be a lot of suffering for Magnus still. So he must have thought there's some perpetual there instead of going for the pawn push. He played queen takes pawn. But now queen check, king moves, queen check, king moves, queen check, king moves, and then Firusha pushes. Because now there's no queen f4 check. And the pawn is promoting first. So if black pushes, white promotes, and in cases where both queens are there on the board, the side who got the queen first will probably give a checkmate to the black king. And that's likely to happen. So that is why Magnus resigned here after the push. There was a computer-like move he could find, which is pretty unexpected. Like you can, instead of playing king f7, if Magnus had played king f8, then he could have held this game according to the engine. Basically, it'll be still slightly better for white, but the difference now is there is no check on h7. And if for example the same thing happens, queen h4, and let's say queen takes, and then queen check, king moves. This time there's no check and capturing the pawn. That's not going to happen because after queen check, there's queen f7. And if queen d5, black can just keep blocking with the queen. Because of a b7 pawn is not yet fallen, white cannot go for the exchange of queens. And this was a chance compared to what happened in the game. In the game, what happened was takes, and then queen check, and the b pawn also fell. So Firuzshah's pawn got to the end in time. Even though Magnus's pawn is closer, the white pawn was able to reach faster. So that's why King f8 was the way to basically try to hold a draw, but it was not to be. And Magnus lost his second game in a row